In the sterile glow of her laboratory, Dr. Elara Vance stared at the impossible data on her screen. The ancient Greek device wasn't tracking the stars at all. The ghostly gears hidden inside the legendary Antikythera Mechanism were counting down to something far more terrifying. Her whispered words echoed in the empty room. It wasn't a clock, it was a timer. But a timer for what? And what happens when an ancient doomsday device finally reaches zero? In the deep quiet of the night, the only sound was the clean, steady hum of machinery doing impossible work. This was the world of Dr. Elara Vance, a world painted in the cool, blue-white light of server racks and monitor screens. Her domain was the control room for the Argus Array, a particle accelerator powerful enough to peel back the layers of reality like an onion, revealing the secrets hidden within matter itself. She sat, a solitary figure of focus amidst the controlled power, her dark hair tied back, her eyes tracing the flow of data across a vast bank of screens. On the central display, a three-dimensional model of a Martian meteorite rotated in silent perfection. At a flick of her fingers across a touch panel, layers of the digital rock peeled away, revealing veins of olivine and feldspar in vibrant, false colors. Each datum point was a pixel of truth, a verifiable fact in a universe she believed was, at its core, entirely knowable. She took a slow sip of black coffee from a worn steel thermos, her other hand making a swift, precise annotation on a tablet. Her movements were economical, her workspace obsessively neat. There were no stray papers, no clutter, only the tools of her trade, arranged with the geometric precision of a circuit board. This was Elara's sanctuary, a place where chaos was banished, where every question had an answer waiting to be measured. She was a high priestess of the empirical, and the hum of the accelerator was her sacred hymn. Her world made sense, but that was about to change. The next day, the quiet hum of the lab was replaced by the oppressive silence of a tomb. A heavy steel door, thick enough to withstand a blast, hissed open, revealing a room kept at a constant, chilly temperature. Dr. Julian Croft, the museum's head of antiquities, led Elara inside. He was a man in his 60s, impeccably dressed in a tweed jacket that seemed at odds with the high-tech sterility of the vault. He carried himself with the weary authority of a man who had been the last word in his field for a very long time. "Here she is," Croft said, his voice a low, reverent murmur. On a pedestal of black velvet, under a single, focused beam of light, sat the Antikythera Mechanism, or what was left of it. It was a lump of corroded, calcified bronze, fragmented into three main pieces, its surface a testament to 2,000 years spent at the bottom of the sea. It looked less like a machine, and more like a rock that had once dreamt of being a clock. The world's first analog computer, Croft continued. The words part of a speech he had likely given 1,000 times. A clockwork of the cosmos, built by a genius who saw the heavens not as the realm of gods, but as a system of gears and cycles. He looked at Elara, a thin, patronizing smile playing on his lips. "Your proposal was intriguing, Doctor. A novel application of your scanner, you called it. To peer inside without causing further damage." Elara met his gaze, unfazed. "The Argus Array can resolve details down to the micron. It will give us a complete, three-dimensional blueprint of every internal component. We'll finally know exactly how it worked." "Indeed," Croft said, his tone still laced with condescension. "Just be careful. She's extraordinarily fragile. It would be a tragedy if our curiosity were to damage the official record." His concern felt less like a plea to protect the artifact, and more like a warning not to disturb the comfortable narrative that had been built around it. To men like Croft, history was a static, settled thing, a collection of truths to be guarded, not a series of questions to be answered. Elara was here to ask a new question, and he clearly didn't like it. The process was as tense and silent as a bomb disposal. From the safety of the control booth, Elara guided a multi-jointed robotic arm. Its metallic fingers, padded with soft silicone, closed around the largest fragment of the Antikythera Mechanism. The arm moved with an unnatural liquid grace, lifting the ancient wounded object from its velvet throne. For a moment, it hung suspended in the air, a relic from the age of myth held in the grasp of a machine from the age of atoms. Elara's face was a mask of pure concentration, her eyes darting between the live camera feed and the arm's control interface. She gently guided the artifact into the maw of the Accelerator's sample chamber, a cavernous cylinder lined with polished lead and a web of complex sensors. With a final, delicate maneuver, she placed it onto the analysis stage. "Object is secure," she said, her voice crisp in the quiet room. She took a deep breath and initiated the lockdown sequence. With a low groan of heavy hydraulics, the massive lead-lined shields of the chamber began to slide into place, sealing the ancient device inside the heart of the machine. The cool white lights of the lab dimmed, replaced by the urgent amber glow of warning lamps. And then came the sound, a low, powerful hum that seemed to vibrate not in the ears, but deep in the chest. The Argus array was awake. The scan had begun. A torrent of subatomic particles was now flooding the 2,000-year-old bronze, mapping its secrets, translating its physical form into pure data. Science was peering into the past, and Elara could only wait to see what it found. Hours later, the control room was once again Elara's solitary sanctuary. The scan was complete. On her main screen, a perfect digital twin of the Antikythera Mechanism floated against a black background. The initial render was breathtaking. Every known gear, every dial, every painstakingly inscribed letter on its surface was captured in stunning, microscopic detail. She could see the faint scratches left by its creator's tools, the subtle warping of the bronze from centuries of undersea pressure. It was the official record Croft had spoken of, made flawlessly, beautifully real. She rotated the 3D model with a practiced gesture, her mind already drafting the introduction to her paper. It would be a landmark study, a triumph of technology and historical preservation. But then, she frowned. A flicker. A ghosting in the image as it turned. "Just a render artifact," she murmured to herself, her fingers flying across the keyboard to apply a standard noise reduction filter. The main image sharpened slightly, but the flicker remained. It was a faint, almost transparent lattice of structures, shimmering into existence from certain angles, layered behind the primary gear assembly. It was like seeing the reflection of a second face in a window. She reran the filter, increasing the signal-to-noise ratio. The ghostly image solidified. It was not noise, it was a coherent structure. A second system of gears, impossibly complex and delicate, meshed together in a way that had no apparent connection to the main astronomical function of the device. It didn't correspond to any known part, any broken fragment, any scholarly theory. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She zoomed in, pushing the render to its maximum resolution. The ghostly gears filled the screen. They were real. The data was unequivocal. The Accelerator hadn't just scanned the machine the world knew. It had found another one, hidden inside it all along. And as she stared into that impossible spectral clockwork, Elara Vance felt the first crack form in the foundations of her orderly, predictable world. The human brain is wired to find patterns, to impose order on chaos. For a scientist like Dr. Elara Vance, this is not just an instinct. It is a discipline, a creed. The ghost in her machine was chaos incarnate, an unacceptable variable in an otherwise perfect equation. And so, her first duty, her first instinct, was to destroy it. Not with ignorance, but with logic. Her stark modern office became a war room, and the enemy was the possibility that she was wrong. For 2 days, she didn't work on the artifact, she worked on the Accelerator. Her screens, once filled with the elegant rotation of the hidden gears, were now cluttered with dense columns of calibration logs, sensor data, and diagnostic readouts. She was hunting for the bug, the glitch, the single flawed line of code that would explain everything away. She ran simulations of the particle beam's trajectory, searching for minute deviations. She analyzed the resonant frequencies of the sample chamber, looking for a harmonic vibration that could have created a phantom image. She cross-referenced the software logs from the exact moment of the scan, searching for a processing error. Each test was a methodical attempt to prove herself wrong, to falsify her own incredible finding. And each test came back with the same infuriating, pristine result: negative. The Argus array was working perfectly. The sensors were flawless. The software was clean. With a final frustrated sigh, she threw her pen down on the desk, where it clattered against the cold metal surface. The anomaly wasn't an error in the machine. It was real. It was in the artifact. The chaos was not in her tools, but in the world itself. The mystery was not a malfunction. It was a feature. Having failed to disprove the anomaly's existence, Elara moved to the next logical step. She would explain it. If the ghost was real, it must have a rational purpose. Sealing herself in her office, she dedicated herself to the data. She meticulously filtered out the digital model of the known mechanism, leaving only the spectral, impossible clockwork it concealed. She fed the isolated data into a rendering program, and on her screen, the ghost took on solid form. It was breathtaking. It was an entire second machine, a system of interlocking gears and rings so intricate and elegant that it made the outer astronomical calculator look like a child's toy. The craftsmanship, even in digital form, spoke of a mind of staggering genius. Working furiously, fueled by coffee and the thrill of discovery, Elara began to formulate a hypothesis. The device had to be astrological in nature. That was the only paradigm that made sense. But this hidden machine was clearly on another level. Perhaps it wasn't for our zodiac, but for a different, forgotten one from a civilization that predated the Greeks. Or maybe, she thought, her heart quickening, it calculated cosmic events the ancients were never thought to have understood: the long, slow wobble of the Earth's axis, the precession of the equinoxes, or even the movement of stars outside our solar system. It was a radical theory, one that would rewrite textbooks, but it was a theory that still fit within the established function of the device. It was a bigger, more complex clock, but it was still a clock. She had found a way to contain the mystery, to place it on a new, larger, but still understandable shelf in the grand library of science. She had an explanation. She had a new piece of the puzzle to show the world. Dr. Croft's office was a shrine to a bygone era. Dark wood paneling, shelves lined with leather-bound books, and a faint smell of beeswax and old paper. It was designed to convey gravitas, permanence, and power. On the large, high-definition monitor that seemed so out of place in the room, Elara's render of the hidden mechanism rotated in silent, complex beauty. Croft stared at it, his face unreadable, his hands clasped behind his back. Elara stood beside the monitor, her voice filled with a passion she couldn't contain. As you can see, the complexity is an order of magnitude greater than the primary assembly. The gear ratios don't correspond to the Saros cycle or the Metonic cycle. My hypothesis is that it tracks a much longer, more complex celestial pattern, one we didn't think the Greeks had the mathematical tools to even conceive of. Croft was silent for a long moment. He walked over to his desk and picked up a heavy, ornate letter opener, turning it over in his hands. "What you have, Dr. Vance," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "is a very compelling piece of digital pareidolia." Elara blinked. "Pareidolia? Julian, this isn't a face in the clouds. This is hard data. The Accelerator doesn't invent. The Accelerator is a tool." Croft cut her off, his voice hardening. "And like any tool, it can be misinterpreted by an operator who is overly eager to make a name for herself." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "You have allowed your imagination to run away with a sensor artifact. You are creating a fantasy." "A fantasy? The data is verifiable. It is nothing," Croft said, his voice now cold as ice. His role was to protect orthodoxy, and Elara was a heretic. "You will not publish this. You will not present it. You will add a footnote to your primary analysis describing an inconclusive sensor artifact, and that will be the end of it. Am I understood?" The dismissal was absolute. It was a public execution with an audience of one. She was not just being told she was wrong, she was being told she was a fool. She stood there, her passion turning to ash in her mouth, the beautiful, intricate machine on the screen behind her seeming to mock her. She had been silenced. Back in the cool, sterile confines of her own office, humiliation gave way to a cold, burning defiance. Croft could forbid her from publishing, but he couldn't stop her from thinking. He couldn't stop her from proving she was right. If the hidden machine tracked a celestial cycle, a simulation would prove it. It was the one test that would provide undeniable mathematical proof, a truth that even Croft couldn't bury under condescension. Working late into the night, she programmed the simulation. She fed the precise gear ratios from her render into the university's astrophysics modeling software. She set the parameters, telling the computer to run the virtual gears through their cycles and compare their movements against every known astronomical database from the Babylonians to modern NASA catalogs. She hit enter and leaned back, a sense of vindicated anticipation washing over her. She expected the simulation to spit out a match, a single elegant correlation that would be her silver bullet. The simulation finished. A sea of data filled the screen, but there were no correlations, no matches. Instead, the simulation showed only chaotic, meaningless patterns. Against the predictable, clockwork precision of the heavens, the movements of the hidden machine were pure noise. There was no rhythm, no cycle, no logic. Her safe hypothesis, the neat and tidy explanation she had built to contain the mystery, was completely, utterly wrong. She stared at the screen, the defiance in her chest slowly freezing into a cold knot of dread. Her logic had failed her. The scientific framework she was using was useless here. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The machine wasn't tracking the sky at all. It was tracking something else, something unknown. And for the first time in her life, Dr. Elara Vance was confronting a mystery that her science didn't just fail to explain, but failed to even comprehend. Failure is a cornerstone of the scientific method. Every wrong turn, every collapsed hypothesis, is a signpost pointing toward the truth. But for Dr. Elara Vance, trapped in the labyrinth of the unknown, it felt less like progress and more like a descent into madness. The days blurred into a sleepless, caffeine-fueled haze. Her once immaculate office a sanctuary of order, became a chaotic den of obsession. The clean white walls disappeared behind a frantic collage of printouts, gear ratios, arcane symbols copied from obscure historical texts, complex mathematical proofs that led nowhere, and star charts from a dozen different civilizations. Empty coffee cups formed a small, teetering skyline on her desk. She slept there when she slept at all, her head pillowed on a thick reference book, her dreams haunted by the silent, mocking rotation of the phantom gears. She threw every piece of known science at the problem. She ran simulation after simulation, her desperation growing with each negative result. If not the stars, then what? The tides? She mapped the gear movements against millennia of oceanic patterns. Nothing. Seismic activity. She cross-referenced them with the geological record of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. Chaos. She delved into the esoteric, the fringes of science and history. She tested the gears against the forgotten calendars of lost civilizations, against the complex musical scales of the Pythagoreans, even against the pseudo-scientific theories of ley lines and planetary alignments. Every test was a failure. Every beautifully constructed theory collapsed into meaningless noise. The machine refused to make sense. The frustration mounted into a cold, hard knot of despair in her gut. She, Dr. Elara Vance, who believed every mystery had a logical solution, was staring into an abyss of pure, stubborn nonsense. She was a master locksmith, presented with a door that had no key. She was trapped, not by a lack of knowledge, but by the very limits of it. All her training, all her expertise across multiple disciplines, was useless. The machine was outside of it all. At her lowest point, convinced she was missing something fundamental, she abandoned her office for the dusty silence of the university library. Her new line of inquiry felt like a fool's errand. Maybe the anomaly wasn't in the design, but in the material itself. Perhaps the ancient Greeks had used a unique bronze alloy, a metal with properties that could have created the ghost data in the Accelerator. Bleary-eyed and running on fumes, she sat in a quiet corner, surrounded by thick tomes on ancient metallurgy, a field far from her own expertise. The words on the page started to swim. She rubbed her eyes, leaning back in the hard wooden chair. Her laptop, idle for too long, let its screensaver kick in. It was a simple, elegant animation she'd chosen long ago. A visualization of atomic orbitals, electrons buzzing in their prescribed, probabilistic clouds around a nucleus. She stared at it absently, her mind numb with fatigue. Then her gaze drifted to the table beside her laptop. A previous student had left behind a heavy textbook, An Introduction to Particle Physics. It was open to a chapter on radioactive decay, and on the page was a chart. A simple, elegant graph showing the exponential curve of isotopic decay over time. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The curve, that gentle, inexorable, downward slope. It was familiar, terribly, uncannily familiar. Her heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drum against her ribs. The fog of exhaustion in her mind vanished, burned away by a sudden, brilliant flash of insight. It wasn't a straight line. It wasn't a circle. It wasn't a sine wave. It was a curve. The pattern she had been looking for wasn't a cycle. It was a countdown. A storm had broken over the city, rain lashing against the windows of her office. The tempest outside was a pale reflection of the one inside Elara's mind. She worked with a manic, focused energy she hadn't felt in weeks. On one side of her main screen, she pulled up the chaotic, meaningless data from her failed gear simulation. On the other, she displayed the decay curve from the physics textbook. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, writing a new piece of analysis software. It was a radical idea, a shot in the dark that felt more like a leap of faith than a scientific hypothesis. She instructed the program to reinterpret the gear movements, not as a measurement of distance or time, but as a physical representation of a mathematical decay function. She was telling the computer to overlay the two sets of data, the mechanical movements of the ancient gears and the quantum principle of radioactive decay. She hit enter. The progress bar filled with agonizing slowness, and then it was done. On the screen, the chaotic, jagged lines of the gear simulation, the noise she had been unable to decipher for weeks, snapped into perfect, elegant alignment with the smooth curve of isotopic decay. It was a one-to-one match, a flawless, undeniable correlation. The storm outside raged, but inside Elara's office, there was a sudden, terrifying silence. The gears weren't tracking stars. They weren't tracking tides. They were tracking the steady, predictable decay of radioactive elements. She stared at the screen, her face illuminated in its stark white glow. Her expression shifted from the wild triumph of discovery to a slow, dawning horror. Her mind reeled, putting the pieces together. An ancient machine built with the precision to track the decay of atoms. But the decay rates it mapped were unlike any known element. They were too fast, too energetic. This wasn't a device for telling time. It was a device for measuring the life of something unimaginably powerful. It wasn't a clock. She whispered to the empty room, her voice trembling. It was a timer. The question was no longer what the machine was, but what it was for. What was it counting down to? The answer required more power than her office computer could provide. She went to the university's main simulation lab, a cavernous, circular room where the centerpiece was not a screen, but a floor-to-ceiling holographic display. The air was cool and smelled of ozone. She stood at the central console and inputted her new, terrifying data. She tasked the university's supercomputer with one final simulation. The premise was simple. If the hidden mechanism was a timer for a power source, fueled by the decay of these unknown, hyper-energetic elements, what would happen when the timer reached zero? She initiated the run. The lights in the lab dimmed, and the holographic display flickered to life. A three-dimensional image of the Antikythera Mechanism materialized in the center of the room, turning slowly in the air. For a moment, it was inert. Then, the simulation began. The hidden gears clicked into their final position. The device in the hologram began to glow, a soft blue at first. Then, the light intensified, shifting to a brilliant, angry white. The simulated energy readings on the console next to Elara climbed exponentially, screaming past every known scale. The hologram flickered wildly, the image of the mechanism dissolving into a point of pure, blinding light. The final frame of the simulation showed a catastrophic, expanding sphere of energy, a miniature sun that vaporized the device and everything around it in absolute, silent annihilation. The simulation ended. The hologram vanished. The lab was plunged back into darkness and silence. Elara stumbled back from the console, her hand flying to her mouth, a wave of vertigo and nausea washing over her. The numbers, the data, the elegant curves, it all resolved into a single, horrifying truth. The ancients hadn't just built a timer, they had built a bomb, and they had left the blueprint. The dawn broke grey and cold, filtering through the blinds of Elara's office. She hadn't moved all night. She sat in the darkness, the catastrophic simulation still paused on a monitor nearby, a silent digital ghost of a sun, frozen at the moment of its birth. Her gaze, however, was fixed on a different screen, one displaying a simple map of the Aegean Sea. A single red pin marked a location between the islands of Crete and Kythera, the site of the Antikythera shipwreck. For 2,000 years, it had been a simple story. A Roman cargo vessel, laden with Greek treasures, caught in a sudden storm and lost to the depths. A tragedy, a priceless loss of art and history. But now, staring at the pin on the map, Elara saw a different story entirely. The pieces clicked into place with the horrifying final weight of a coffin lid shutting. The storm was a lie. The journey was not one of transport, but of disposal. They weren't moving a treasure, they were getting rid of a threat. She imagined the scene, a small crew of sailors, their faces grim with a knowledge that must have felt like a curse, sailing their ship into the deep sea, far from any coast. They weren't merchants. They were custodians of a terrible secret, tasked with a desperate, sacred mission. The people who built the device, those minds of unimaginable genius, who had mapped the heavens and touched the atom, had made a mistake. They had created something they could not control, a power that threatened to unmake their world. And so, in the end, their final, greatest act of scientific genius was not the device's creation, but its destruction. They had been forced to sacrifice their masterpiece, to sink it in the deepest, most inaccessible waters they could find, praying it would never be found. The shipwreck wasn't a tragedy. It was a heroic act of self-preservation, a story of fear and wisdom that had been silent for 2 millennia. Elara stood before the museum board, a panel of stony-faced academics arranged around a long, polished mahogany table, with Dr. Croft seated at its head like a king holding court. The air in the boardroom was thick with institutional gravity. Elara didn't start with the ghost gears or the decay curves. She knew that would sound like fantasy. She started with the conclusion. She showed them the energy cascade simulation. On the large screen behind her, the holographic sun bloomed and died in silent, terrifying glory. Her voice was steady, urgent, stripped of all academic jargon. "This is what the device was designed to do," she said. "This is the result of its countdown, reaching 0. I don't know if it was a weapon or a power source that catastrophically failed. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the artifact in our vault is not a symbol of genius to be displayed. It is a warning. It is arguably the most dangerous object on the planet, and it needs to be secured, not exhibited." The silence that followed was heavy and complete. The panel members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at Croft. He let the silence hang for a moment before he began his attack. He didn't raise his voice. He was calm, methodical, and utterly brutal. "Thank you, Dr. Vance," he began, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "That was a vivid presentation." He rose and walked slowly toward the screen. "What you have presented here is a chain of radical inferences based on a single, unverified sensor anomaly. You leap from a data flicker to a hidden machine, from a hidden machine to unknown radioactive elements, and from those elements to this doomsday scenario." He gestured to the screen. "There is no direct evidence for any of it. None. What you have is a story, a compelling one, I'll admit, but it is pseudoscience, dressed up in the language of simulation." He turned to face the board. "Dr. Vance is a brilliant physicist, but it seems she has fallen in love with a fantastical theory. She has lost her objectivity." He looked back at Elara, his eyes cold and devoid of pity. "Effective immediately, your access to the Argus array is revoked. The board has decided to place you on indefinite administrative leave to reconsider your position." We cannot allow the reputation of this institution to be jeopardized by such sensationalism. It was a complete and total victory for him. He had framed her as unstable, her science as fiction. He hadn't just rejected her warning. He had erased her. Stripped of her credentials, her lab access denied, her research impounded, Elara was an outcast. She sat in her small, book-filled apartment, the city lights twinkling beyond her window. She knew Croft. He wouldn't just ignore her findings, he would bury them. He would delete the data, classify the logs, and ensure the most important discovery in human history was nothing more than a footnote in a dismissed personnel file. The thought of that truth being lost forever, of that silent warning going unheeded, was more than she could bear. After hours of staring at the wall, her mind a turmoil of professional ethics and moral duty, she made a decision. She opened her laptop and launched a secure messaging application. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed the name, Ben Carter. He was a historian, rumpled and unconventional, but with a reputation for being fiercely independent and pathologically curious. He was the one person she knew who might actually listen. She wrote a simple, stark message. Ben, I found something. Something you need to see. Don't trust the official story. Below the text, she attached a single, massive, heavily encrypted file. It was everything her raw data from the Accelerator, the 3D renders, every failed and successful simulation, her lab notes, her theoretical models, her entire professional life, her career-destroying discovery, all compressed into a handful of gigabytes. She hesitated for only a second, her cursor hovering over the send button. Then she clicked. It was done. There was no going back. The atrium of the National Museum was packed with press. Dr. Julian Croft stood at a podium, beaming with confidence. Behind him, a massive banner displayed a glorious artist's rendering of the Antikythera Mechanism, its gears gleaming like gold. He was at the height of his power, having successfully crushed the internal descent, and now moving forward with his grand plan. For too long, Croft announced, his voice smooth and authoritative, this marvel has been hidden away. We are proud to announce the Mind of the Ancients, a new multi-million-dollar permanent exhibition that will allow the world to see the genius of the Antikythera Mechanism up close. He spoke of it as a symbol of peace, of pure intellectual pursuit, of a heritage that belonged to all of humanity. As he was lauding the ancients for their peaceful wisdom, a reporter in the front row glanced down at his phone, a puzzled expression on his face. Then the phone of the journalist next to him buzzed, and then another and another, a wave of digital alerts spreading through the room like a virus. A low murmur began to build. On a large television screen mounted to a nearby wall, which had been showing a live feed of the press conference, the image suddenly cut to a breaking news banner. The text was stark and bold against a red background. Exclusive. 2,000-year-old Greek computer was a doomsday device. Leaked data reveals. Croft's confident smile faltered. He saw the reporters turning, no longer looking at him, but at their screens, their faces a mixture of shock and predatory excitement. They turned back to him, a forest of microphones and cameras rising, their questions coming like gunshots. Dr. Croft, is it true? Were you aware of this data? Is the museum covering up a threat? His face went pale. The controlled narrative, his carefully constructed world of academic authority, had just been blown apart in a global public spectacle. The press conference dissolved into a chaotic, shouting mob. The truth was out, and it was no longer his to control. The truth, Elara discovered, was not a clean, surgical instrument. It was a blunt object. And once thrown into the world, you couldn't control where it landed or what it broke. The university campus had become a hunting ground. News vans lined every curb, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like strange metallic sunflowers. Reporters and camera crews stalked the manicured lawns, turning a place of learning into a chaotic, buzzing hive of speculation. Elara walked through it all, the unwilling center of the storm. Her name and face were everywhere, splashed across television screens and phone notifications. She was a hero to some, a crank to others, a traitor to the scientific establishment she had once called home. Her face was grim. This public circus, this feeding frenzy of hot takes and half-truths, was not the rational discourse she had wanted. It was a spectacle, and the spectacle was threatening to devour the actual warning contained within her discovery. As she rounded a corner, she saw him, Dr. Julian Croft, cornered against the ivy-covered wall of the history building by a mob of journalists. His usual impeccable composure was shattered. His hair was disheveled, his face was pale with fury, and his eyes darted about like a cornered animal. He was shouting, trying to be heard over the barrage of questions, but his words were lost in the cacophony. Seeing him like that, stripped of his power and dignity, Elara felt no triumph. She felt only a profound sense of sadness. She had sought to reveal a scientific truth, and in doing so, had unleashed a very human kind of chaos, a storm she had no idea how to control. That night, she slipped through the silent, empty museum corridors like a ghost. The credentials Ben Carter had provided worked flawlessly, opening doors that had been slammed shut to her. Her destination was the high-security vault. The alarms were temporarily deactivated, the guards reassigned pending the investigation. She keyed in the code, and the heavy steel door hissed open into the familiar, chilled darkness. He was there, as she knew he would be. Croft stood alone before the pedestal, a solitary figure illuminated by the single, dramatic beam of light shining down on the Antikythera Mechanism. He didn't seem surprised to see her. The argument that followed was not one of shouting or accusations, but of quiet, intense confession in the near darkness. "You've destroyed me, Elara," he said, his voice raspy, his gaze fixed on the corroded bronze. "You tried to destroy the truth," she countered softly. He finally turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a deep, weary anguish she had never seen before. "You think I was afraid you were wrong?" he asked, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "My dear girl, from the moment you showed me that first render, I was terrified that you were right." The admission stunned her into silence. "For 40 years, he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "I have been a guardian of history, a gatekeeper of the story we tell ourselves. It is a story of progress, of enlightenment, of humanity slowly, painstakingly climbing out of the darkness. And you brought us a monster, a serpent in our Eden, a story that says our ancestors, in their genius, created a weapon that could have annihilated them. What does that do to our story? What does that do to the public trust in science, in progress? It breeds fear, panic, hysteria." He took a step toward her. "I did what I did not to protect my reputation, but to protect the world from a truth I did not believe it could handle. I chose to manage the knowledge. You believe it must be set free, no matter the consequences. That is the difference between us." He wasn't a simple villain, she realized. He was a man who had appointed himself the guardian of a fragile lie, believing it was for the greater good. It was the ultimate clash. Her fierce, pragmatic belief that the truth must be faced, versus his paternalistic certainty that it must be managed. As they stood in the tense silence, a low, deep rumble started, vibrating up through the concrete floor. The light fixture above them swayed, It was a minor earthquake, a common enough occurrence in the region. Dust motes, dislodged from the ceiling, danced in the single beam of light. On the pedestal, the artifact trembled, a tiny corroded fragment of bronze, weakened by the centuries and loosened by the vibrations, detached from the main body. It flaked off, falling with an almost imperceptible tick onto the black velvet below. In that instant, their entire philosophical argument became meaningless. Both of them, the pragmatic scientist and the dogmatic gatekeeper, froze. Their eyes, wide with the same primal, irrational terror, were locked on the device. A single, shared thought flashed between them, raw and pre-verbal. It's starting. The data, the history, the ethics, it all evaporated, replaced by a pure, superstitious fear of the monster in the room waking up. The rumbling stopped. The dust settled. The device remained inert, a silent lump of bronze. The moment of shared terror passed, leaving a different kind of silence in its wake. They looked at each other, the animosity gone, replaced by the grim understanding of a shared burden. The intellectual debate was over. The terrible, awesome potential of the knowledge they both possessed was now a palpable presence in the room, a weight they would both have to carry. Months later, Elara stood at a podium in a brightly lit modern chamber in Geneva. She was poised, confident, addressing a global committee of the world's leading scientists and policymakers. She had been through the firestorm of media and investigation and had emerged, not unscathed, but tempered. The Antikythera Mechanism is not a prize to be studied for its potential, she said, her voice clear and steady. It is not a weapon to be reverse-engineered or a power source to be unlocked. It is a message. It is the single most important warning in human history. She clicked to her final slide, which showed not a simulation or a line of data, but a simple photo of the artifact resting on the seabed where it had been found. The builder's final act, she concluded, was their most profound discovery. They learned that some knowledge is too dangerous to pursue, that some power is too great to control. They taught us that the ultimate expression of wisdom is not creation, but restraint. Therefore, my recommendation is not that we study the device further. My recommendation is that we listen to its creators. We must secure it in the deepest, most inaccessible repository on Earth, and leave it there, untouched, forever. Let it be a silent monument, a permanent reminder that the line between genius and self-destruction is terrifyingly thin. She finished, and the room was quiet. The chairman of the committee looked at her, then at the other members, and nodded slowly. The vote was unanimous. Elara had won, not by proving her science, but by wisely interpreting its soul. She had transcended from a mere discoverer of facts to a guardian of their meaning. Her pragmatism now fused with a wisdom the ancient Greeks would have understood. The truth had been set free, and in the end, she had managed to control it after all. What a fascinating story. On the surface, it is about a brilliant discovery, a scientific triumph. But underneath, it's really about the weight of knowledge and who gets to carry it. Dr. Vance is our hero, the champion of empirical truth. She follows the data, no matter where it leads. But it's hard not to feel a sliver of understanding for her antagonist, Dr. Croft. His argument is unsettling because it's not entirely illogical. He represents the idea of managed truth, the belief that society needs to be protected from knowledge it isn't ready for. He sees himself not as a liar, but as a guardian. The story pits these two worldviews against each other. The absolute, unwavering pursuit of truth versus the paternalistic management of it for the greater good. And for a moment, in that vault when the ground shakes, neither philosophy matters. Both the pragmatist and the gatekeeper are reduced to the same primal, superstitious fear. It's a powerful reminder that beneath our complex belief systems, we're all just human. It leaves you wondering about the nature of discovery itself. So, I am curious to hear what you think. Is knowledge always a universal right, no matter how dangerous? Or are there some truths that are better left buried?